People think a mother's love never breaks, but they never talk about what happens when that love is ignored, taken for granted, and left behind. I spent most of my life raising my son, believing that sacrifice would build loyalty, gratitude, and respect. I was wrong. Years later, he returned, not for love, not for forgiveness, but for $10 million. This is the story of how I lost my son, found my strength, and learned that real karma does not come from revenge. It comes from self-respect. My name is Linda Carter. I am 48 years old, and my life has been shaped by one role above all others, being a mother to my son, Ethan. When my husband Michael died unexpectedly, everything changed. Overnight, I became a single mother, the only provider, and the only emotional support for a young boy who depended on me completely. I worked full-time in an administrative office, often taking extra shifts to make sure Ethan never felt the financial stress I carried silently. There were many nights when I came home exhausted, but I still helped him with homework, listened to his worries, and encouraged his dreams. I gave up vacations. I delayed personal goals. I ignored my own loneliness. Every choice I made revolved around one mission: to give my son a stable and successful future. Ethan was smart, ambitious, and full of potential. I attended every school event, celebrated every achievement, and reminded him that discipline and gratitude would take him far in life. Watching him grow into a confident young man felt like my greatest success. I truly believed our bond was strong, built on years of sacrifice, trust, and unconditional love. But I did not realize one painful truth. Sometimes when a mother gives everything to her child, she forgets to protect her own heart, and soon I would learn how fragile that bond could become. Ethan met Rachel during his final year of college. She was confident, ambitious, and very protective of her independence. At first, I welcomed her warmly. I wanted my son to be happy, and I respected his choices. When they got married, I expected our relationship to stay close. Instead, things slowly began to change. Ethan started calling less. Family dinners became rare. Conversations that once felt natural now felt rushed. Rachel believed Ethan needed to focus on his new family, his career, and his future. Without what she called outside influence, I tried to stay understanding. I reminded myself that children grow up, build their own lives, and move forward. But deep inside, I felt something slipping away. One day, I suggested spending a holiday together. Ethan hesitated before replying, saying they already had other plans. His voice sounded distant, polite but no longer warm. That moment hurt more than I expected. I realized I was no longer a priority in my son's life. The boy I raised with love and sacrifice was slowly drifting away, guided by choices that did not include me. I told myself to stay strong, but I could not ignore the quiet fear growing in my heart. I was being left behind. The distance between Ethan and me did not happen overnight. It grew slowly, quietly, like a door closing without making a sound. Weeks passed without a call, then months. When I reached out, his replies felt formal, short, careful. He always sounded busy, distracted, or in a hurry. I told myself not to take it personally, but the silence hurt more than any argument ever could. One evening, I invited Ethan and Rachel for dinner. Rachel politely declined, saying they needed more space to focus on their marriage. Ethan did not object. He simply agreed. That was the moment I realized something painful. My son was not being pushed away. He was choosing to step away. I stopped asking. I stopped reminding. I stopped chasing a relationship that felt one-sided. Instead, I learned to sit with the quiet, the absence of a son who once needed me every day. It felt like losing him without a goodbye, and yet I stayed silent, not because I did not care, but because I refused to beg for love. After Ethan drifted away, I went through a quiet period of grief, not dramatic, not loud, just a deep, private sadness that followed me through daily life. But I refused to let heartbreak define me. I focused on my career. Over the years, I had built experience in administration and finance, so I applied for a higher-paying position at a mid-sized investment firm. With discipline and patience, I slowly moved up. I also began investing small amounts of money, carefully, legally, and responsibly. I studied markets, consulted financial advisors, and avoided risky decisions. Nothing happened overnight. My progress was slow, steady, and realistic. Outside of work, I started rebuilding my identity beyond motherhood. I traveled modestly, I joined a local community group, I learned to enjoy quiet mornings and peaceful evenings on my own. For the first time in decades, I was not living only for someone else. I was living for myself. And without realizing it, I was preparing for a future that would change everything. My financial success did not come from luck or miracles. It came from years of patience, smart planning, and disciplined decisions. One of the companies I had invested in early, a growing technology firm, was acquired by a larger corporation. Because I had held my shares long-term, the value increased significantly. At the same time, I had built a solid retirement portfolio and a small real estate investment that appreciated over time. After taxes, legal reviews, and professional financial planning, my total assets reached nearly $10 million. It felt unreal at first, not because I wanted luxury, but because I remembered the woman I used to be, counting every dollar to pay school fees. I did not change overnight. I stayed private about my wealth. I kept my lifestyle modest. I focused on stability, security, and independence, not showing off. But I knew one thing. My hard work had finally given me freedom, and soon that news would reach someone who had been silent for years. I did not tell Ethan about my financial success. I did not feel the need to, but news travels fast. One afternoon, after years of silence, my phone rang. When I saw Ethan's name on the screen, my heart paused for a moment before I answered. His voice sounded warmer than it had in years. He asked how I was. He said he had been thinking about me. He mentioned that life had been busy, complicated, stressful. Then carefully, he brought up my investments. He asked how I was doing financially. I felt a quiet sadness settle in my chest. He had not called to ask about my health. He had not called to apologize. He had called because my success had caught his attention. A few days later, he asked if we could meet in person. I agreed, not out of excitement, but out of closure, because I wanted to see whether he had returned as my son or as someone seeking opportunity. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. I arrived early, unsure of what I felt, love, disappointment, or simply acceptance. When Ethan walked in, he looked older, tired, more serious than the boy I once knew. He hugged me politely. It felt careful, not warm. We talked about small things at first, work, life, memories, but there was a distance in his tone, like he was speaking to someone he no longer fully knew. Then the conversation shifted. He asked about my financial situation again, about my investments, about my future plans. I listened without interrupting, and in that moment I understood something clearly. He had not returned because he missed me. He had returned because he saw value in what I had built. I felt no anger, only a quiet heartbreak and a growing sense of strength, because this time I was not the desperate mother waiting to be chosen. I was a woman who knew her worth. After a few polite meetings, Ethan finally said what he had been avoiding. He explained that he and Rachel were facing financial pressure. A business decision had not gone as planned. They needed support, significant support. Then he carefully mentioned the number, $10 million. He said it as if it were a family matter, as if my years of sacrifice, pain, and silence could be repaid with a request. He spoke about partnership, about trust, about rebuilding our bond. But I could hear the truth beneath his words. He was not asking because I was his mother. He was asking because I was wealthy. I felt the old ache, but it no longer controlled me. I looked at my son and realized something heartbreaking. He had come back for money, not for me. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not shame him. Instead, I spoke calmly. I told Ethan that money cannot replace love, respect, or responsibility. I reminded him that when I needed emotional support, he chose distance. When I felt abandoned, he stayed silent. I explained that I was not angry, but I would not reward neglect or guilt-driven requests. If he wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on honesty, accountability, and real effort, not financial expectations. I made it clear I would not fund his mistakes. I would not buy his return, and I would not trade my self-respect for his approval. For the first time, he had nothing to say, and for the first time, I felt truly in control of my he. After our conversation, Ethan became quiet. Days passed, then weeks. He did not call to argue. He did not call to ask again. Instead, he called one evening with a different tone, softer, humbled, and sincere. He told me he finally understood what he had done. He admitted that he had taken my love for granted, that he had allowed distance, pride, and influence to weaken our bond, that losing my trust hurt more than losing money ever could. For the first time in years, he apologized, not for financial reasons, but for emotional abandonment. I listened. I forgave him, not because I owed him, but because I deserved peace. I did not give him $10 million. I did not rescue his lifestyle, but I allowed something more meaningful, a slow, careful chance to rebuild our relationship, honestly, respectfully, and without financial dependency. The real shock was not revenge. The real shock was my strength, and the karma was simple. He learned that a mother's love is priceless, but not something to abandon and buy back later.